I'm thinking about this Esa Enai. I'm thinking about this lifting our eyes up to the mountains. And folks around here in this Boulder area, we get to really celebrate them. I see it every time coming from almost Kansas, where I live now, in Erie. Do you know where that is? And I come down Arapahoe, and the mountains are right there. It's an incredible moment each and every morning. But like I started with, I think Esa Enai is figuring out, how do I look out into the world? How do I see? We talk about that a lot here. How do we actually see what's in front of us, not through sight, but by being present and by opening up our hearts and being a little bit vulnerable and thinking a little bit beyond our own selves? I think that's what faith and tradition of any sort is supposed to do. Certainly what I know of Judaism, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Help us to see so that we can respond. Help us to know so that we can feel. And if we can see and feel and know, then perhaps we can do a better job at being present and showing up. I kind of feel, this last few years, I give the same sermon, showing up, having a sense of somebody else who's in front of us developing an inability to just walk by somebody who's homeless. Opening our hearts, even when that's risky, so that we can be moved and we can let people in and heal a terribly broken world. The Torah portion has led me to this story. It's another kind of Torah. It's the Torah of a fellow named Sam Fishman. It's a true story. Sam Fishman shares his Torah that comes from his folks. You see, when his own father was about 16 years old, he left the Russian pogroms and he settled in the other Holy Land of Brooklyn. This was a kid from a shtetl, and he studied all day, and he memorized Torah, and he knew the rabbi's teachings, and all of that kind of traditional Russian shtetl kinds of language. But here in America, he had to earn a few dollars, and he went to work, like so many other people, in a sweatshop. And Sam's mother came to Brooklyn from Romania. When she met his father, she was 17, was working as a seamstress, and he fell in love with a beautiful girl. She fell in love with a gentle Torah scholar. And this lovely young immigrant couple worked and scrimped and saved to put together all of those pennies to buy a knitting machine and started a business making sweaters. For a few years, relatively speaking, they had some prosperity. Things were going pretty well. Life became a little bit easier. A number of us know this story from our own families, including the storyteller, Sam Fishman. Now, Sam's father was intent on expanding this business and wanted to make it in America. So he went into debt and took everything he had and all of the reserves funds in this family, and he put it into this business, and then came the Depression. And the Depression wiped them out. And Sam saw his father's spirit crushed. And Sam's mother and father did what couples do. They took care of one another. They lifted one up when the other felt like they were falling down, and vice versa. Now, eventually, Sam's father was able to borrow $200 in order to purchase a little candy store. The rest of their working years was in this candy store, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, with the exception of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in their candy store, sustained only by their hopes that they can make a difference for their children's future. Again, sounding very familiar. And from behind the soda fountain, Sam's father would explore the universe and talk about wonders and creation, and really had a sense of gratitude. And Sam saw that, and he heard that. He had a sense of appreciation for the human being that he didn't see in other people. Other folks didn't recognize how much another human being was really worth, despite the fact of the hard hours and the long hours. So one morning, Sam writes, Pa was at the soda fountain, as usual, waiting for the rare customer. I was off in a corner reading a magazine. It was about 10 a.m., and a short, thin, middle-aged man came out of the sun and into our store. He was neatly dressed in a well-worn blue suit and tie, and he asked Pa if he might have a drink of water, apologizing because he didn't have the 2 cents to buy a glass of seltzer. Of course, the father says, "Take this seltzer, you owe me 2 cents." And the man started sipping slowly and began to tell Pa, Sam's father, in a slow, halting voice, how he had walked there all the way from the Bronx. If you don't know what the Bronx is, after this you have to go look it up. He walked from the Bronx hoping to find work in the tailor shop that was down the street. It was a temporary job, but it paid a full $10 for the week. He read the advertisement in the evening edition of the paper, and he left his home long before dawn. And our store, says Sam, was in the section of Brooklyn close to Coney Island. It's miles and miles and miles away from the Bronx. And by the time he got to the tailor shop, the job had been taken. And now he had to walk all the way home again, back to tell his family. And the man was crying to Sam's father, "Will I ever get a job?" And Sam Fishman never forgot his father's face as he cried silently with the stranger that entered the store. The father went to the register, took out $2 and changed the whole morning's receipts, and he gave it all away. Afterward, he never said a word about it, never spoke about it again. That's a human being. In the Torah, we have, in this text, again, the commandment that says God upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow and befriends the stranger, providing him with food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. We are supposed to walk in God's ways, emulate God, if you will. How do we do that? If God is saying, watch out for the stranger, befriend the stranger, so then we have to do it. And if you're not so sure about God, then follow Sam and his father. Because this is our Torah too. Immigrant stories coming from nothing, and that's might not be our story today, but we can't forget what that story was. We can't forget how we got here too. We can't forget that part of our memory is leaving Egypt and all of the opportunities we have by going to a promised land. We have not just identification, but we also have an inclination to help. And I think our stresses and our pushes and our pulls kind of push away this inclination to actually help someone, because when we do it, it actually feels pretty good for both of us. But we've been kind of trained to ignore everybody and everything around us. So we just kind of take. Have you noticed that? We take a lot. We use a lot. And whenever I say that, I go right back to Israel, and I think about that salt sea, right? Yam HaMelach. In Hebrew, it's just about salt. But we call it in English the Dead Sea. The sea that's the lowest place on earth. The water goes into it, but nothing leaves it. It only takes, and that's why it's dead. It only takes. Sam's family could have used a few extra bucks. That wasn't easy. $2 back then. But there was something bigger and greater. So what does this mean for you and me? Every Jew has a history of being a stranger. And if you're a stranger, you can also be a seeker. And if you're from another place and you're coming into that ancient Israel promise, you're going to be protected. So whether it is people in our country who feel vulnerable, or it's someone in our sanctuary who's looking for a homecoming and is part of a journey, our job is to befriend. So I hope that we can focus a little bit about bringing the divine presence, the Shekhinah, the presence of God, bringing that presence to us in our lives, in our homes, in our workspaces, making sure we know who's actually sitting next to us, and alleviating any sense of feeling like a stranger. Maybe we can do that. A stranger is someone more than that we just don't know. A stranger is someone who feels vulnerable and different, someone who feels unknown and unwanted. So as we encounter one another and we recognize and remember that we're created in God's image, maybe we can break the barriers, cut through them, be present, be responsible, be compassionate. As Sam's father was for that man, as God was for Abraham and Sarah, and as God is for us. That's what I want to share this Shabbat. So, take a breath. We move back to our Siddur, back to our prayer.